Hello and welcome to Dateline London. I'm Carrie Gracie. This week, a whole 6 months for comedians to make Brexit trick-or-treat jokes as the UK wins an EU extension until Halloween. But who has a better plan on how to use the time? And Benjamin Netanyahu on the brink of a fifth term. Will the Israeli Prime Minister now annex parts of the West Bank? My guest today, journalist and Israel analyst Jonathan Sacerdoti, Iain Martin of The Times, the Italian writer Annalisa Piras, and Abdel Bari Atwan, writer on Arab affairs. Welcome to you all. Now, don't waste this time, said European Council President Donald Tusk as the EU granted the UK a 6-month extension. But what constitutes time well spent in the context of Brexit? Iain, you first. Let's look at a timeline for the next 6 months. I think we could usefully do that for everyone involved in Brexit. So for the next 10 days, MPs have got Easter recess. Now, are they going to use the time to reflect, as the Prime Minister suggested, or are they going to lie in a darkened room gorging on chocolate eggs?
I think the latter, actually. I think that's what most people are going to do. Anyone who's watched the farce of the last few months unfold, which has been a bit like, as a friend of mine in America said, because we can't have a third series of Fawlty Towers, this is the next best thing, this British farce. People at Westminster are tired and stressed on both sides, and when people are tired and stressed, they don't necessarily make smart decisions. So a break is welcome, but once they come back, things will intensify pretty quickly. There'll be another attempt at trying to get Theresa May's deal over the line. It seems unlikely, not totally implausible, but unlikely that that will succeed. The 6-month limit is actually really rather clever by the European Union. It's not so far away that the Brits or the British political establishment can just forget about it for 8, 9, 10 months. It's close enough that minds do have to be concentrated either in the next month or so or in September, October. And then remember, the crucial thing that's happening is that you've got the European elections. So this is about much more than just Britain. There are going to be a fascinating set of elections across Europe, then the selection of a new European Commission, President of the European Commission, a whole new power structure and political dispensation in Brussels, and those people will then be negotiating with the Brits again in September, October.
We'll come back to that for latter end of the timeline in a moment. Jonathan, just on those cross-party talks that Iain alluding to there, that is in the Prime Minister's diary, it's in the opposition leader's diary for the next few weeks. How much time will that take up, do you think?
Well, one would like to be a fly on the wall in some of those meetings. I mean, we heard one of her own MPs asking Theresa May when she announced those discussions between herself and Jeremy Corbyn why 1 week she was totally against him as a threat to national security, and then she said, what's the greater risk? She said, this is all about balancing risks. Why on earth was she trying to usher in an era of government potentially by what her own MP called a Marxist, anti-Semite-led Labour Party? And I think that she's going to continue to struggle with that. So I don't see those talks really going anywhere, because what she's doing in those talks is allowing the whole thing to spin out longer and longer, knowing that they won't come to an agreement, or if they do, it's an agreement that will destroy not only her own party, but the morale of 17.4 million people who voted to leave the EU.
And how, just on the timeline, how much of the next 6 months do you think that spinning process that you called it will take?
Personally, I can't see it going on for much more than another week or two, because I think this is going to be another technique that's going to fail for her. She's tried everything. She's going to try pushing through her deal again, and she's going to keep flogging that dead horse. So potentially she could keep flogging the dead horse of discussions with Jeremy Corbyn as well, but it's so damaging to her that I can't see her keeping that one going quite as long as she is with these so-called meaningful or apparently not so meaningful votes.
Annalisa, do you think those cross-party talks are going anywhere?
I think so, if common sense prevails. As Iain was saying, Britain has become a farce. It has burnt an international reputation for intelligence and pragmatism. This chance is the chance to show that actually Britain can claim back that reputation for intelligence and pragmatism and do what normal governments do. They find a compromise between the opposition and the government. A compromise is obviously possible. So will they show pragmatism and intelligence? I think they have to, because I don't think that there is any more time to kick the can down the road, because the time for doing that is gone. 3 years have passed by. So they need to find a compromise. A compromise is possible. I think that if you look at the situation, they could find a deal for which they accept the withdrawal agreement of Theresa May, with the condition that the Labour Party has already defined, to put it back to the people. That would be a way to reconcile the country, to stop this confrontation which has been damaging for everybody, and try to find a negotiated solution that would also possibly avoid the folly of going to the election of the European Parliament when the country wants to get out.
Barry?
Well, I'm surprised, actually. Iain is talking that we could have a new European Parliament. We could have a change of the hierarchy of the EU. I mean, we could have a new president, we could have a new staff. But are we going to have also the same Theresa May by 31st of October, for example? This is the biggest question. Are we going to say changes in this country? Are we going to say a change in the parliament itself, different parliament?
So Barry, on the question of change of leadership, are you arguing that the Conservative Party, the government, should change its leader before it involves itself further in the process that Annalisa described as necessary, those cross-party compromise talks?
Yes, I believe Theresa May failed to control her government, to control her party, to influence the country, failed also to deal with the parliament. She was rejected, or her deal rejected 3 times by the parliament. So now she is talking to the opposition, which is very late. If she cannot convince her party, if she cannot convince her parliament, if she cannot convince her government, of any sort of a deal, do you think she will actually convince the opposition? I'm absolutely optimistic.
You can take that up. I mean, there obviously are voices in her own party which says, she has abjectly surrendered. It's time for a new leader. Pressure will mount, etc., etc.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, I've been arguing for almost 2 years that Theresa May should be replaced. I think Britain is attempting to do something really difficult without a properly functioning Prime Minister, someone who can persuade, cajole. Personally, I have major doubts about her deal, but I think her deal is the best way forward. Any way out is going to involve her deal as the basis of an exit. But she has failed to persuade her own party. I think she will. I think she will. She'll certainly face lots of pressure to go, but she seems determined. At Westminster and in Whitehall this week, certainly that was the gossip, that she's determined to stay. The cabinet in the UK doesn't seem strong enough to force her out. Her view is that she wants to stay until the withdrawal agreement is done, and just hopes that at some point in the next couple of months, everyone in Britain is so worn down by it that the deal, or a tweaked version of the deal with some changes that Labour approve of, gets Britain out.
But Martin, we have a local election very soon, and all the predictions saying that Conservative Party will do, badly in this election. So I think she's like a cat with 7 lives, to be honest. I think we are, I hope she's running out of these lives.
That's the other thing which has formed in Britain this week, this sense that Brexit may actually be lost. I'm a moderate Brexiteer, I voted for it, I want to leave the European Union. But if the Conservative Party fails to deliver Brexit, the Conservative Party is broken. Yes. If the Conservative Party is broken in a largely two-party system, first past the post system, that means that Labour wins, and Labour is controlled by Jeremy Corbyn. So people are quite, across the spectrum, people are really quite chastened by that. I wonder if that won't, post-Easter, force some people to start to reconsider their position, and some of the diehards to actually vote for the deal. We'll see.
And so just on the kind of coming back to our timeline, Jonathan, we have, Barry referred to, Ian's referred to, we've got the local elections May 2nd, then we've got the European elections May 23rd. On Friday, we saw the Brexit Party launch with Nigel Farage talking about a revolution politically to put the fear of God, as he called it, into the establishment. Is that kind of revolution in prospect at these elections?
Who knows? And I think we've got to the point where it's so hard to map out timelines and to know what's going to happen. But this Farage party, which is effectively what it is, whatever he calls it, is also in itself quite depressing. Yes, it's a sign that politics is broken. This is a phrase we hear politicians say when they don't know what to do. We heard it from the Tiggers as well. But politics is broken doesn't actually fix it, simply saying that over and over again. And the re-emergence of Nigel Farage, who I'm no particular fan of, but I must say is possibly the most successful politician of his era. He's a man who, without ever having been elected into the House of Commons, with only one MP in the House of Commons, has managed to totally turn on its head this idea of the UK being subservient to Europe, being part of the European Union. He's managed to bring about the referendum. He managed, in large part, to get people in the country to vote to leave the EU. And now he's reappearing again because he feels the party that he used to represent is racist and bigoted and disorganised. Now, we'll have to see how much of that was as a result of his leadership, whether he encouraged it or tolerated it. So I'm not sure that his party is going to be the saviour of broken politics in this country, but it certainly is an interesting feature to see him and then the fig leaf of a Rees-Mogg, who would have thought it, Jacob Rees-Mogg's sister Annalisa, coming up as the sort of respectable voice of Nigel Farage. This certainly seems to be making the circus something of a three-ring circus. And I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, that is the failing of all of our politicians. They've led us into a situation, a circumstance where nobody at all, individuals, Leavers, Remainers, Conservatives, Labour, Tiggers, anyone knows what's happening or when it's happening. And that makes planning one's life, whether it's taxation, what you own, selling your house, where to live, which passport to have, which nationality to identify with, makes it utterly impossible. And that's depressing for Leavers and Remainers.
And I suppose it's fair to say also that, you know, contingency planning, the Prime Minister has said, Annalisa, that she does not want to hold the European elections on May the 23rd. But that means at this point, as we stand in mid-April, people have got to plan contingency an election which the Prime Minister doesn't even want to have. And we've still got a prolonged no-deal cliff. It's receded by 6 months, but it's still there, that business are saying.
That's one of the biggest headaches, because elections cost a lot of money. And to bring the farce to that point in which a country that wants to get out will have to hold elections and spend an enormous amount of money in a country whose growth has come to an halt. Investment is going out, there are serious problems. I mean, to hold that democratic exercise would be ridiculous. But again, I think that that is also another pressure on the political classes of Britain to show intelligence and pragmatism. A cross-party agreement must be found before that becomes a reality, because then that would just simply complicate things further.
Annalisa, thank you. And we're going to leave Brexit there. And in fact, we're not only going to leave it for this week, we're actually going to leave it for next week as well, because I think if MPs can have a Brexit recess, so can we on Dateline. So barring very major developments on the Brexit story, we will also take an Easter break next week, I think, from it. But right now, we're going to move on to Israel and the Middle East, because in congratulating the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week, Donald Trump said his election victory promised good action on peace between Israel and Palestinians. So does it? Some of Israel's staunch friends in the United States warn Mr. Netanyahu's campaign pledge to annex parts of the West Bank will instead lead to greater conflict. Now, Jonathan, I'm going to go to you first, because obviously some of our viewers may not have followed the Israeli election closely. They may not have followed the result closely. Can you give us a thumbnail of where it leaves us?
Yes, well, it's certainly been an interesting election, and that's because the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now entering another term of office when there was an extremely strong effort to get rid of him. And that was an effort led by a little group of well-respected army leaders and politicians who grouped together with the sole express purpose of getting rid of him. And going back to what you originally said about the so-called Trump peace deal proposal, which nobody has seen except perhaps for Benjamin Netanyahu, who may know parts of it from his discussions with the president of the US, well, we know that in Netanyahu, why did they vote for this man who is potentially up against corruption charges during the term of office that he's about to enter, who the country is sick of in many ways? It's unusual to manage to enter your 13th year of office. That's extraordinary, not consecutive, but 10 years consecutive, 13 altogether. Why did Israelis vote for him again? Possibly because they see in him a man who has stood up to a US president, as he did with Barack Obama, against the Iran nuclear deal. And ultimately, after Obama's time of office, he's won on that because Trump has listened to his counsel. He let Israel survive during that very tough period of Israel-US relations. He stood up also to Trump when he went and spoke in Congress on Trump's doorstep, on Obama's doorstep. He's stood up to US presidents who don't seem good for Israel. And he's also shown that he's a great friend of the current US president, so that should there be a prospect for peace in the so-called Trump deal, he'll be able to work with the president in order to bring it about. So whatever is in that sealed envelope of the Trump plan, maybe Israelis feel that Benjamin Netanyahu, who's kept them safe, led macroeconomic success in the country, who has reduced the number of rockets and terror attacks on the whole, kept them alive, who has made relations with Arab states in the area under the radar, and also knows how to deal with US presidents good and bad for the country. Perhaps he's their man again.
And just very briefly, collapse of the left and liberal Labour.
Yes.
Down to less than 5%.
Decimated. And that's partly because the left has rather lost its way in Israel. They didn't necessarily in this election campaign represent their best policies. Instead, they had their votes stolen by the blue and white party, the new party that didn't exist last year, which was really a coalition of famous figures there to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu, something they failed to do. But they did manage instead to decimate the left and steal votes away from Labour, once a party of actual government, and now down to a handful of seats in the Knesset. Utterly, utterly disastrous for them.
Barry, I mean, shifting uneasily and a couple of grunts during a couple of the things that Jonathan was saying, where does this election result leave Palestinians and indeed response from the Arab world wider?
First, when Donald Trump, the leader of the biggest power on earth, is working for you as your election director or campaign director, when actually you are supported by the extremist right-wing population, I think it is easy to win this election. What will happen, I believe Benjamin Netanyahu is more dangerous to the Israeli themselves than the Palestinian, to be honest, because now he is actually going to destroy the image of Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East to an apartheid state. This is what will happen when he actually...
What do you mean by an apartheid state?
Apartheid state, when he actually endorsed and he said he will implement the nation-state laws which actually consider Israel as a state of the Jews only. And anybody who is non-Jew, he wouldn't have a place in this state. That's what he said.
It justifies Israel as a nation-state of Jews, but it doesn't absolutely say that other minorities in Israel...
That's what he said. That's what
he said.
That's what he said, and it is written and it is documented. He said Israel is a state of the Jews. Non-Jews, they are not actually citizens of this state. And it is written and it is...
Sorry, Mr. Atwan, it's nonsense.
Go to the Economist. Is the Economist lying?
Read the law itself. He never said that non-Jewish members of the Israeli population are citizens. He's never said that. Nobody said that.
So should we just accept that there are non-Jewish citizens of the State of Israel?
There are 20% of the population of Israel, not only occupied
territories. Just voted in elections and just voted in Arab members of Knesset.
Without the occupied West Bank or Jerusalem or Gaza Strip, 20% of its citizens are Palestinian Arabs, Christian and Muslim.
He said that those people are not citizens.
Of course he hasn't.
Sorry?
He put in place a $15 billion plan in 2006 to improve Arab neighbourhoods, Arab cities,
I can prove
Arab
it to you
education.
now. When we'll go to the Google and I show you what he said exactly. This is one thing. Second thing, he is going to annex the West Bank.
So this is something that we can we just check that we can agree? We cannot agree on that, on the assertion about those citizens of the State of Israel who are not Jews. We cannot agree that he. I don't think Jonathan's agreeing that he said that
he doesn't agree, but it is documented.
We're just going to leave this on one side. But I think what we can agree on is that Benjamin Netanyahu has pledged to annex.
What he said during what he said during the election campaign, and I urge most people to take with a pinch of salt what politicians say 2 days before an election, but he said it, and he stood by it when asked about it again, was that he would like to impose Jewish law in the Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank, such as Ma'ale Adumim, places like that, which have always, in every peace plan, actually been assumed to remain under Israeli rule, whether or not they'd be in return for land swaps or the like. He was saying he wouldn't justify the forced removal of those towns or people. Now, that is very controversial because obviously it upsets people who want to see a like-for-like land swap, certain borders that they want. But we're talking about effectively 2% of the West Bank area in which Jews live. And that's something that will potentially, in the Trump plan, he'll be forced to compromise on that. He may be given that by Trump, we don't know. But it's certainly what's necessary in order to deal with those sorts of things is negotiations. And for rather a long time, including with Trump, the Palestinian Authority has refused to even discuss with the Trump White House what they would like. They've said no. The Palestinians are possibly the only national independence body that has said no to its own state so many times.
Because this seems to be quite a monologue.
So, Jonathan, I think if you can stop there. Barry, I want to hear what the Palestinian response is and the Arab world response is to the re-election of Netanyahu.
First, this nation-state law, it is written and it is there and it is documented. It means Israel a state of... Okay, just one second.
Yeah.
Second thing, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to annex the West Bank. What it means, all the major major areas of the West Bank, which is Area C. It means the death of two-state solution. It means there wouldn't be any state for the Palestinian. The Palestinian and the international community recognize this solution, the two-state solution. Netanyahu is saying now, I don't want this.
So we've
he never recognized it.
What are the Palestinians going to do about it? What are parts of the Arab world going to do about it?
Look, the Palestinians, they don't have nuclear warheads. They don't have 300 nuclear warheads like the Netanyahu and the Israeli, first. Second, they don't have one of the fourth biggest army on earth. They don't have the support of the international community, and the United States, the biggest superpower on earth. So what do you expect the Palestinians to do? The Palestinians should be helped by the international community, by the European, by the American, to say to the Israeli, enough is enough. You are killing a two-state solution which is recognized by everybody on earth. You are establishing a racial state, apartheid state in Israel.
International communities. What is the Arab region doing right now in response to the Israeli election?
The Arab region, maybe Benjamin Netanyahu managed to go to Oman there and he was well received, but, Oman is 2 million and the Arabs 400 million. So we cannot say he is actually winning the Arabs to his side. That now there is a huge changes on the Arab world. There is revolution, popular revolution in Algeria, popular revolution in Sudan. There is other one in Yemen. So the Middle East is changing. Now, Netanyahu is, creating or actually establishing or re-encouraging radicalism in the Arab world, on the whole of the Middle East.
That's the danger. That's the danger.
This is the danger.
We don't usually agree on these questions, but I think that the election result, which actually has had very little attention outside the region, really because it wasn't the story that the Western media was hoping for or expecting, which was Netanyahu having his career ended. But I think his victory is a tragedy and a potential geostrategic catastrophe, because the attempt to unseat him was really a manifestation of another Israel, the other Israel, which can, even through its military and through its civil society, can see that the Netanyahu die-hard approach is leading Israel to a very, very dangerous place. And I think there is a case for saying that the Trump plan, that Trump, strongman, can then broker deals elsewhere in the region. But I think people are going to be disappointed. It is a deal hatched together by Kushner, we haven't seen it yet, but by Kushner and the American ambassador to Israel. And I think it will provoke among the Palestinians' allies an uprising and a backlash, which will have very serious consequences indeed.
Annalisa,
I think that it would be helpful also for our viewers to have a look at the political situation, which is a worry and a concern, because we're talking about a prime minister who's going to be indicted in the next few months.
But I want you, we've only got a minute left on the programme. Annalisa, Barry's saying the international community needs to do something. We've heard a bit about a Trump plan. Just a few words on what the EU, which has traditionally played a significant role in the Middle East and in the Israeli question, Oslo Accords and so on. What can Europe do? Is there a role for Europe? Is it doing anything?
Well, the European Union for 25 years has supported the Oslo Peace Accord to create a two-state solution. It has been suffering a setback when Trump recognized Jerusalem as the new capital, because the European Union has pushed over and over again for a diplomatic solution. That was a controversial solution. So at the moment, the European Union is in a very fragile situation, also because of Brexit. So what we are witnessing is that the biggest defender of the two-state solution in Israel-Palestine is very weak and still determined, but very unable to do anything.
And there, I'm afraid, everybody, we are going to have to leave it. This is obviously a subject that we will come back to many times over the next few weeks and months. That's it for Dateline London for this week, and we are back next week, same time. Goodbye.
Hello there. We've got more of the same really through the rest